Digital comics are a game changer. Now, don't get me wrong, my physical collection still grows by like a dozen issues every week or so, but something about having access to thousands upon thousands of comics in a small rectangle that fits in my pocket, it just works for me, especially as a busy dad. But my favorite app for reading digital comics right now is Global Comics. Global Comics is basically the home of indie comics. You've got publishers like Dynamite, Dark Horse, Image, and now DC. So if you can go to comicsaredope.com/global, you can actually save on their annual gold pass while supporting the channel. So again, visit comicsaredope.com/global to save. Well, my friends, we are back with another returning guest to Comics Are Dope, the podcast. You might remember just a little over a year ago, I spoke with this gentleman and we were getting like the return of Gargoyles to comics, and it was really fun. We had a whole Kickstarter for these amazing additions to get all the old Gargoyle stuff back in print to go right along with the new Gargoyles that we've been getting. And now we've got several spin-off miniseries that have come out, and we've got more in the works. And so here to talk about them with me is Mr. Greg Weisman. How are you today, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I feel like my audio's ducking out. Let's see. All right. But yeah, I'm doing well. I'm really excited to be here once again talking about Gargoyles. And I got to ask just right out the gate, last time we spoke, you were telling me about this pages long document, this timeline that you've been building for Gargoyles over the years. I got to ask, like, how satisfying it's been for your sort of headcanon to now come out and like be able to share with the rest of the world.
Uh, it's wonderful. I mean, it's a short answer. I'm, want to be clear. I'm not sharing the timeline with anybody. That's top secret. Uh, being able to write stories and in the Gargoyles universe to add to the timeline. Every time I write a story, I get an idea. I get ideas for like five more stories. So I'm constantly adding to the timeline. I just pulled it up because I'm curious myself how many pages it is, and it's taking. It's so long that it's taking a while for the document to tell me how many pages it is. So I'll get back to you on that.
Yeah.
In the meantime, yeah, I've had for a long time certain tent poles in the timeline, things that I know happen. I don't want to make it sound like the timeline has all these stories complete with dialogue or anything like that, but it's got certain events that I know take place, and I'm constantly adding to it. And so to be able, particularly in this new series, Demona, to hit some of those tent poles and to hit some stories that we've created in between the tent poles has been a lot of fun.
Awesome. And so, speaking of course, we are here to talk about Demona, which will be the newest Gargoyle series hitting newsstands. But for the viewers at home, those who may not have jumped on the train with the original or the newest Gargoyles re-release back in 2023, I think it was. Could you
Yeah.
get us up to speed on, sort of, I guess not spoiling what's happened, but what's been released in the last couple of years and where we kind of are now?
Right. So we did 12 issues of Gargoyles, a an arc called Here in Manhattan, which dealt with um, Goliath's arrest and trial with the crime families of New York, um, and well, a bunch of other things as well. But it was all very New York centric. Felt a little more real world than some of the things we've done in the past. Uh, Everything's relative. There's still gargoyles flying around in it, but this was a much more grounded story. In while that was going on, I also did a 6 issue miniseries with Drew Moss called Gargoyles: Dark Ages, which is a prequel taking place even before the flashback episodes from the TV series. And this was it was called Dark Ages Alliance, and it was about the original alliance between the humans and the gargoyles on Wyvern Hill. Then we also did a Halloween special and a winter special, just one shots. And then the most recent thing we did was Gargoyles Quest, which is about Demona's attempt to basically take over the entire universe. And now on New Comic Book Day, which is coming up fast, Saturday, May 3rd, we have Demona Zero coming out. And Demona Zero does two things. It's got 2 stories in it. The first tease up this 5 issue Demona miniseries that premieres with issue 1 on May 28th. And then the second story, which is brief, but tease up a crossover that we're doing between Gargoyles and the Fantastic Four. And the latter was a huge secret that today was just all over the internet. So I didn't know they were going to reveal that. I thought we weren't going to reveal that till New Comic Book Day came out, but there are all sorts of articles about it today. So I guess it's not a secret anymore. So that's big, exciting news that we've got this crossover with Marvel and specifically with the Fantastic Four.
For sure. Yeah, and we'll get back to that crossover because I'm excited about it. Now with Demona, does this take place like directly after the events of Gargoyle's Quest?
So the Demona Zero is set actually in the middle of Gargoyle's Quest, and that tees up the story. But no, the miniseries, the 5 issue miniseries, is actually set during the 1,000 years when Goliath and Lexington, Brooklyn, Broadway, Hudson, Bronx, they were all sleeping as stone statues for 1,000 years. But Demona was not. She was traveling the world just trying to survive and forging herself from into the villain that we've come to know in the present, which for Gargoyles is 1997 right now. So that's how present we are. But so what I'm not going to pretend that in 5 issues we can cover the entire 1,000 years. I'm not trying to do that.
Right.
But what we're doing is telling 5 stories, sort of 5 snapshots from Demona's life across the first couple 100 years of that 1,000 years. And each story is set in a different year across those 200 years. Each story is set in a different location across the world. Each story is even a different genre. It has a different mood, feel, tone to it. So the first issue is historical fiction. The second issue is swashbuckling adventure. The third issue is horror. The fourth is mystery story, detective story. And the fifth is an elegy. And so we have a different feel to each issue, and yet there's a through line that runs through these 5 issues. More than one thing, but the biggest thing is that this miniseries introduces a new character to the audience. This is Demona's foster daughter, Angelica, who we meet in Demona 1. And so her story with Demona goes through these couple centuries and these 5 issues.
Man. So I think that's exciting. I remember I binged the original Gargoyles. I guess those first 2 seasons is what I ended up watching.
Those are the 2 that we consider canon.
Right. But I remember there's the flashback episodes. You kind of see like how the alliance between the Gargoyles and the humans breaks down. We see their turn to stone until 1997, or was it 96 back then? But
94 actually,
oh man.
but yeah,
And so we see that, and then
it's only taken us 30 years to get all the way from 94 to 97.
listen, we keep going at this rate. We'll just keep having fun with leather jackets and tight jeans. It works for me.
Yeah.
But so Goliath kind of sees her, and is like, oh, because they've got their love thing going on, or had it at some point. And but she's evil, and we don't really know why. Like, and we get like the bits and pieces and kind of see like how she's radicalized. It's kind of villainized, but it's not a lot that I remember being fleshed out back then. So I'm excited to see like more snapshots. I think I'm reminded of Dynamite did that Disney Villains Maleficent series a while back.
Mhm.
And it's like you don't really need to know anything about Maleficent that you didn't get from Sleeping Beauty. Like she's evil, and that's all you really need to know. But you
Unless you're
see,
Angelina Jolie, then you might want some more information.
true, true. And then, but in that series that Sue Lee did really well, you kind of get these snapshots, just like you're saying, like these snapshots, just people coming and trying to take advantage of her or to conquer her for whatever reason, whether it's ego or whether it's pride or just curiosity. But you see, like, okay, it's not just this one-sided, let me be evil for the sake of evil. Um, but you still just kind of get fun like romps. And so it was cool to see in that series. And I imagine, we'll have some fun in a similar vein for this one.
Yeah, I mean, so we've seen now, if you include, if you have had a chance to take a look at our Dark Ages miniseries that we did with Dynamite, you've seen Demona as this pretty innocent, naive teenager when we first meet her. She's certainly got her personality. She's quick to leap into action. She's in love with Goliath. She's There are pieces of who she will be, but this is a young, relatively innocent, relatively naive version of her. And then, of course, we've seen her all the way forward in 97, where, she thinks it's a big compromise that instead of slaughtering the entire human race, she just wants to take mental command of all of them. And that's for her, I'm really compromising here, Goliath. Can't you meet me halfway? And so we've seen her from this naive innocent to this supervillain, megalomaniac supervillain, genocidal. Um, and we've gotten, as you said, little pieces, little moments of what brought her to that place. And this miniseries will add, I mean, again, it's only 5 issues and it's 1,000 years. We're not going to cover every bit of her transformation here from one place to the other, but you're going to get more of a feel for who she is, how she got from point A to point Z um, here in this miniseries. And I think if you're a Demona fan, and I don't know how you can watch Gargoyles or read Gargoyles and not be, then I think you're going to love this.
For sure. Um, and so,
By the way, my timeline finally finished loading. And
okay,
if you're curious, it's 440 pages long.
jeez, I'm gonna have to go back and listen to our last episode to see where it was then and how it's grown or shrunk.
Yeah. The only thing that might be different is that there was this odd thing that I had a desktop computer and a laptop, and for some reason it was different lengths on the two of them.
Hmm,
And the desktop finally died, so everything's off the laptop now. So it's the laptop length that won out. I forget which one was longer and which was shorter, but that's where we are now.
got you. And so, with that, I remember we spoke the last time we spoke. It was like toward the tail end of that Gargoyles series. And we were dead in the middle of the Kickstarter to bring back some of the classic material.
Mhm.
But we were talking about how you felt like it took 4 or 5 issues to really get your bearings. And get out of like the sort of TV writing brain and into the comic writing brain. And,
Right.
now we're about, 15 issues past that. I'm curious to know now that one, do you feel like you're sort of firing on all cylinders? And what do you feel like the sort of core differences are in the mediums and how you navigate them?
I do feel like I'm firing on all cylinders. This series, Demona, actually, so my partner on the TV show was a guy named Frank Parr. And Frank and I were co-showrunners and we produced the show together. Um, and we're good friends, but the truth is we haven't really worked together very much since Gargoyles, which, ended from our standpoint in 1996. Now I've been doing Gargoyles comics off and on for the last, I did some with SLG in 2007, 8, 9, and now these from since 2023. But Frank hasn't really been involved much with Gargoyles, but he still loves drawing the characters. So he actually contacted me and suggested, what if we did a Demona series set during those 1,000 years? And that sounded great to me. It dovetailed with what Dynamite was looking for because they wanted another mini series. So Frank and I sat down, like I said, we have the timeline, and we picked a couple of the tentpole events from the timeline, and then we picked a few other stories that we were going to come up with in between, and then we pitched that to Dynamite and Disney. They loved it, so we went ahead, and it's just been great. Working with Frank, and then our colorist Robbie Bavard, who colored some of the SLG comics back a decade ago, decade plus at this point. So it feels like a bit. We've got Jeff and Nate from the Dynamite stuff. Jeff is our letterer, Nate's our editor. Feels a little bit like an all-star team and getting the band back together, and so I really feel like Demona is really going to kick some ass. And I do feel like we're all of us sort of firing on all cylinders here. In terms of the difference between the medium, the thing that I've discovered, it's going to sound strange, but let me explain. It's
Yeah.
the unit of measure. So when we were back then doing television, the unit of measure was an act because we had commercial breaks in between each act. And even in terms of Act 3, you want everyone to come back the next day, so each act has to tell a story of its own in essence. It's part of the larger story, of course, but it's also got to have its own story with rising and falling action and get you to a point where maybe we've ended on a cliffhanger, maybe it's a big revelation, maybe it's just emotional intensity, but something that makes the audience go, I'm going to sit through these commercials. Keep in mind, it was the 1990s. You had to sit through commercials. I'm going to sit through these commercials uh, and and see what happens next. Or if it was the end of the episode, you get to it and go, wow, that was so great. I've got to come back tomorrow and see the next episode. And the thing that I discovered once I sort of broke free of thinking about comics in that three-act structure from television, because our stories on Gargoyles were so dense, so jam-packed with content, story and character and everything, that I found that it takes 3 issues of a comic book, a standard 20 to 24 page comic book, to equate with a single episode. So when I was doing the SLG stuff, with a couple of exceptions, it was usually 3-issue arcs. And those 3 issues each represented one TV episode. And when I started the Dynamite stuff, the first 3 issues of Here in Manhattan, of the main Gargoyles series, it was still like that. It was like Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3 of an episode were the first 3 issues. But around issue 4, I said, I got to break free of this. I'm still thinking in television terms, and it's a different medium. So I really started thinking about the unit of measure. And the unit of measure in a comic book is not the act, it's not an issue, it's the page. Um, every page needs to tell a story because you need your reader to turn the page, to be interested enough to go, yeah, I'm turning that page because I got to see what happens next. Even if they're looking at it electronically, it's the same basic idea. We still need them to want to, hit uh, that tablet screen or whatever to make that page turn.
Mhm.
Because if they're not that interested, they'll just go, oh, I'll finish this later or whatever. Um, so once I started thinking about the unit of measures of page, that each page had to tell its own little story again, with something at the end. And they can be smaller because it's only one page, but something at the end, whether it's something intriguing or a cliffhanger or a revelation, something that makes you just, I've got to see what happens next. And that freed me up from thinking in terms of issue one is act one, issue two is act two, issue three is act three. Now we start a new arc. Issue four is act one, issue five is act two, issue six is act three. Now we start a new, um, in essence, episode. Now I think in terms of each page doing that, and that means it frees me up from locking in on these three issue um, discrete arcs all the time. And it opens it up to more subplots and more things that all sort of blend in to make the whole. And I think that's really helped me out. I mean, my method otherwise is very similar for both. I use, it's very high tech. I use a lot of 3x5 index cards, black Sharpies, and I got a big table where I lay them all out, move them around until they're in the correct order. Then
Mhm.
I gather them all up, you know, transcribe them into a document, and then that becomes in essence the outline for the script that I'm about to write. Um, and I do it that way on that table, which isn't really big enough, even though it's a pretty big table, because for some reason my wife didn't want to wallpaper our entire house in corkboard. I don't know why, but she just wasn't into that.
Right.
And and since the pandemic, I work from home now all the time, so that's become, the method, and that's true for everything from a TV episode to a movie to a comic book to a novel. I just use index cards. It's how I do it.
Got you. So, here we are after, 30 years of gargoyles, right? Whether you're writing them, quote unquote, on the record or off or in canon or out. Um, you've been living intimately with these characters, for 3 decades at this point. And, I imagine that with that, they sort of tend to take a life of their own. Um, and so
Absolutely.
you're writing these stories, and you've even said, right, like as you write stories, new ideas come. You add things to the timeline, different tent poles, different markers. What are maybe I don't know. We'll pick Goliath just because, or maybe we should pick Demona. Um, what is it? What do you feel like Demona has revealed to you about herself through this writing process?
Well, all the characters, Goliath and Demona included, are rich and complex, and yeah, when it's working, it feels like they tell me what happens next. I don't need to figure it out. It it becomes clear when it's really going well. It almost feels like I'm less coming up with these stories and more like tapping into the actual Gargoyles universe. There's some parallel universe where the Gargoyles really exist, and I've just learned how to tap into it because uh, these characters have very sometimes contradictory but very clear motivations, and so what they do from minute to minute and how they interact and how they speak, all this stuff is pretty well locked into my head one way or another. Without a doubt, it helps that if I'm writing Demona, I've got Marina Sirtis's voice in my head. I mean, Marina played Demona in the show. She was amazing. Um, and I know what Demona sounds like because I can hear her voice in my head. And when I'm writing Demona's dialogue now, I still hear Marina saying it. Same with Keith David on Goliath, or Sally Richardson on Elisa, or Ed Asner on Hudson, or any of them, frankly. Even if I have a new character who didn't appear in the TV series, I sort of mentally cast that character and uh, and so that I've got that performer's voice in my head as well. Maybe not quite as clear, but pretty darn clear. Um, and so it's not hard for me to write gargoyles. I mean, every once in a while there's a story problem. It takes me a minute or so to figure out, or an hour or a day or whatever. But the point is that um, it's a speed bump. It's not Gargoyles comes really naturally to me, and that's because the characters are so strong. And that goes back to our original writing team on the show, which included Michael Reeves, especially Michael Reeves, but Bryn Chandler Reeves, Lydia Morano, Carrie Bates, Gary Sperling, and many, many others. Our directors and producers, Frank Parr, Dennis Woodyard, Bob Klein, Butch Lucic, and others. There's so many people who contributed so much, including our entire amazing voice cast, that it makes my job now as a comic book writer on this series pretty darn easy. It just flows.
So then I would love to contrast that with your experience on Spectacular Spider-Man. We're almost 15 issues in on that, at least what's been released so far. But you're writing Peter Parker, you're writing Miles Morales in mainline continuity. I imagine, we've lived with Peter since 1962, right? Miles is newer to the scene, but neither necessarily would have a reason to live in your head the way the Gargoyles do. How hard is it to sort of tap into them for those stories?
I mean, so Peter definitely lives in my head, because I produced and wrote the Spectacular Spider-Man in 2008,
Right.
2009, 2010. And so, in a similar vein, my Peter Parker is always Josh Keaton. He's the voice of Peter in my head. Um, and with Miles, who admittedly am not as familiar with, but I've read a ton of comics with Miles in it. I've sort of cast Zeno Robinson. Zeno knows this as
Mhm.
Miles in my head, and so their banter actually flows pretty easy for me as well. I don't want to make it sound like my job is too easy because people won't want to pay me, but the truth is that once I sort of locked into their relationship, um, it it wasn't that hard to sort of lick, and the idea that I came up with is that, you know, Peter and Miles, I mean, Peter's sort of perpetually 26 and Miles is sort of perpetually 16. I'm not going to argue the virtues of keeping characters at a certain age forever. I'm not in favor of that per se, but it is what it is, and that's the Marvel universe. And time passes. Um, the years go by, but time passes for these characters very, very slowly.
Right.
And so what that means is that for about nearly 20 years, Peter has been a mentor to Miles. And I've had mentors and I've been a mentor to people. But my experience with that is that at some point, the relationship has to evolve beyond mentor mentee to being friends, or it stops working. It's one thing to have a mentor when you're 20 and the mentor is 25, and then those 5 years, those are big 5 years, particularly professionally.
Mhm.
But, I'm 61 now, so someone who's 66, now those years, that's a very small percentage of our lifetime. And that 5 year difference, if we haven't evolved past the mentor mentee relationship, then that relationship has lost its potency.
Yeah.
But I've found without too much difficulty that most of the people who are mentors to me are now my friends. Most of the people that I've mentored, unless it's very, very recent, are now my friends. And so, what I wanted to do, what I hadn't seen between Peter and Miles in the books, is that evolution past just the pure mentor-mentee relationship into, okay, are they friends now or not?
Hmm.
And we decided in conversation between myself and my editor, Nick Lowe, yeah, they're friends. So um, at that point, we sort of came to the idea that they would hang out every Wednesday afternoon at a coffee bean on the ESU campus, which is where Peter went to college and where Miles is thinking about going to college. And what that suggested to me is that Miles is hanging with Peter at this coffee shop where a lot of college students hang out and a lot of adults hang out, and not a lot of teenagers his age. So Miles's take on this is I've got to act really mature. I've got to be, you know, I got to, in essence, push it so that I'm acting like I'm in my 20s. I'm not, I'm 16, but I'm going to try and behave like the mature one. Pete, on the other hand, is sitting there going, hey, I'm hanging out with this kid. I can act, I can let my inner 16-year-old come out, you know? So he's sort of reverting to a bit of goofiness that I think comes naturally to him, um, but is also a bit of a relief for him because everything he deals with in his own title is so damn grown up. You know, I mean, it's, you know, adult emotional relationships and worrying about money and paying the bills and dealing with supervillains in an incredibly serious vein. And so we decided that this title would be a little more lighthearted. Things would get serious periodically, absolutely, but not every second.
Yeah.
And and it allowed that little flip where you expect Peter to be the big adult in the room and Miles to be the kid. We're going, no, Miles is the one who is, in essence, aspiring and thus, you know, trying very hard to be the adult in the room, just like everyone else. And Peter's letting himself go and just saying, nah, I can be the, I can be the goofball. And you know, every once in a while when things get super serious, you'll see them flip back.
Hmm.
And Peter will sort of say, no, we need to do this first. But for the most part, they can just both be having fun. And that again makes them, once you lock into that, you get that sense in your head of how they talk. It comes pretty easy. Um, and, you know, even we talked about the Fantastic Four. I've been writing Ben and Johnny, not Reed and Sue, but Ben and Johnny have guest starred in a few issues of Spider-Man. And And again, I haven't done a lot with these characters before, although I have now, because I've written Ben and Johnny in Spectacular, and then I've written this little tiny story in Demona Zero for Free Comic Book Day, and then I've written now uh, a story for a Fantastic Four anthology, and then the two Fantastic Four Gargoyle crossovers, one that Dynamite's publishing and one that Marvel is publishing. And so I had never written the Fantastic Four before uh, last year, and now since then I've written them all the time. But even when I first started writing Ben and Johnny in Spectacular, which was my first sort of taste of it, just as them having these little cameo guest spots in it, I found it pretty easy to get their voice because I've read all this stuff. I read Stan and Jack's stuff from the 60s so many times, and a lot of writers since then. And so I feel like I kind of did have their a sense of who they were. I haven't cast them the way I cast Josh as Peter and Zeno as Miles, but but I have a sense of who they are, and for Reed and Sue as well. Um, and it's been a lot of fun. Uh, it hasn't been super hard, but it is a little more of a challenge because I am less familiar with these characters than with some other ones that we've been talking about.
Gotcha. Yeah, I gotta say, I was catching up with Spectacular Spider-Man, at least the two trades I have. earlier today. And one thing that I love about that series is the sort of balance between uh, the light spots and the darker spots, right? Like that first story arc, it just feels so like zany. Like when we talk about like the villain and like just what Peter and Miles are up against. It's just like this is kind of like what's happening here, and then we get into you know how it resolves itself, and then the aftermath, and we're living in this aftermath, and there's this moment where it's just like, man, there are these supporting characters that are like, hey, they tell you what happened to me, like, and they just have to live and sit in that, like, my mind was messed with, and now I got to pick up the pieces. And I was like, that is a really cool thing to include in a comic book, right? Because a lot of times it's like we'll have the big supervillain twirly mustache moment, darn you meddling kids, and then it's just jump straight into the next story. We don't really talk about what happened.
I mean, that's really a lesson that we learned, Brandon Vietti and I learned when we were doing Young Justice. We were, and it really started at a convention for me. I was at a convention on a panel um, that talked about psychology of superheroes, I think was the name of the panel. Um, and the, the person who brought me onto the panel was Dr. Janina Scarlett, who has written books about this sort of stuff. And we're we've done our shtick, and then we've opened it up to Q&A, and a guy got up who was a veteran, and I apologize, I can't remember, but he was a veteran of either Afghanistan or Iraq. I can't remember at this moment, but and he said, I've got uh, PTSD, and I never see that depicted in comics. And you'd think a lot of these characters would have that, and this was like a light bulb going over, going off over my head, where I'm like, oh my God, of course we should be doing that. Why am I not doing that? And the problem I had at that moment is that it wasn't out yet, but all the writing on season 3 was completed. It was too late.
Mm.
I didn't yet have a pickup for season 4. But I said to myself, and I said to Brandon the next day at work, I said, if we get a season 4, we have got to do this. And so we did in season 4, this idea that um, we did it with a bunch of characters, but primarily with Beast Boy, um, voiced by Greg Sipes, who did a fantastic job um, of, showing someone going through stages of PTSD. And that sort of taught me that, we need to normalize the ideas of getting mental health help, and not put a stigma on it, but make it part of what people do. And we need, we talk about in cartoons and comics and in anything that, violence should have consequences. Trauma has consequences. We need to show the consequences of the stories we're telling. And then we need to find dramatic, but we need to dramatize how one recovers from that.
Mm.
And you don't necessarily need every character to be using best practices. Some characters, um, have to find their way to that, if ever. But as a general rule, it seemed good. So the idea of, for example, what we did in Spider-Man in issues 7, 8, 9, etc., of having this group who had all been through this traumatic thing in the Arcadium together, of them having a group therapy session monitored by a professional therapist. That became an important part of the story. And I think it also helps bring out the most in your supporting cast. I mean, it helps illuminate Peter and it helps illuminate Miles, but it helps illuminate a character as obscure as Shelley Conklin, who, has appeared in a few issues of my series, Starbrand and Night Mask from about 10 years ago. And then, 6 or 7 or 8 issues of Spectacular Spider-Man. This is not a prominent character that a lot of Marvel fans know about. but Shelley's important to these group of friends. So let's see how she's getting through this. Let's see how Juliet Marcos is getting through it. Let's see how Kenny Kong is getting through it. And um, and I think it really helps the reader care about the supporting cast instead of going, oh yeah, these are the people who hang out when Peter and Miles are in the coffee shop. It's like, no, these are human beings too, and we want you to care about them. I think that, my editors, Nick and over at Dynamite, Nate, both think that I go crazy with my supporting casts. That it's like they just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and I think they both feel at some point uh, there are too many characters. But I can't help myself. I just always sort of feel like, you're building a world and these characters are part of it, that you can't just leave them out. You gotta move them all forward, not just your leads.
Do you ever like go people watching and like make up like stories in your head about the people that pass by, or is it like maybe you watch a ton of movies and like some of the archetypes and stuff kind of come through from there? Like how does your mind sort of work when you're not at the page?
Well, I definitely watch a ton of television. I mean, I watch a bunch of movies, but I watch a ton of television. And yeah, I think in terms of archetypes, I do people watch. I try and do it in such a way that, I don't get arrested. But it it the idea of archetypes and the idea of again trying to make every character live on the page, not just the two or three who are your leads. I mean, you don't want to lose focus, but at the same time, um, you know, what would The Simpsons be without not, I mean, it's not just about Bart and Lisa and Marge and Homer. It's, they have step by step done so much world building that there's this entire population of Springfield. And we can wrap a story about anyone in
Mm.
that population. And it's tougher if your book is titled The Spectacular Spider-Man to wrap a entire story about, oh, the barista over no, it's got to be about Spider-Man. They're the leads of your story. But at the same time, an issue can really feature that barista. And and give that character life. And in terms of archetypes, I think that way all the time. I mean, there are obvious archetypes and then others that are a little more obscure. I'm constantly sort of interested in the archetype of bastard, the archetype of the trickster, and, and many others. Those are the two that really interest me. But and Peter certainly is um, the embodiment of two archetypes. For me, one is everyman, the archetype of the everyman.
Mm.
That's what Stan and Steve were trying to do from day one, which is that, hey, let's not give superpowers to the last son of Krypton. Sure, he's special. Let's not give superpowers to rich Bruce Wayne or, super technology or whatever. Let's give superpowers to this schmo from Queens, you know?
Mm.
Uh, and when you, and going back to the Middle Ages, this archetype of the everyman, of just this guy, this normal average guy, and how does he get by in the world, and how does he deal with love and religion and government and all this sort of stuff? How does he pay the bills? How does he find a girlfriend? All this sort of stuff. That was the bread and butter of what Stan and Steve were doing with Peter Parker from day one.
Mm.
And then the second archetype that I think sort of came in more gradually, particularly with Spider-Man, is the archetype of the trickster. Um, And spiders have been trickster figures going back to Africa and Anansi the spider. Um, and you see in Peter as he quips, he doesn't just do battle, he entertains.
Right.
And that's conscious. Now, it's conscious in the sense that it's a big release for him to be cracking these jokes at the villain's expense as he fights them, but it's also a way to keep them off balance. If the jokes are annoying Doc Ock, Doc gets angry and he gets out of control, and that creates an opening for Peter to get in there and do what he needs to do. So it serves two functions, but it also makes him a bit of a trickster. And so he is not the biggest trickster in the Marvel universe, certainly, but he is without a doubt, that's a big part of his archetypal appeal. Why is Spider-Man, of all the Marvel characters that people like Stan and Steve and Jack, etc., created, why is Spider-Man the one that, if you had to, doesn't mean it's your personal favorite character necessarily, but if
Hmm.
you said, pick one character to represent the Marvel universe, everyone's going to pick Spider-Man. He is their number one character, right? Um, and why is that? And I think it is that mix of the everyman archetype and the trickster archetype that makes him so completely appealing. And Miles is like a younger version of that. It's interesting because Miles, of course, is the age that Peter was when the whole thing started. Peter was in
Hmm.
high school, and it took years to get Peter to graduate, much longer than it normally would. But Peter eventually graduated, went to college, eventually graduated college, and has been out there. And then he got kind of stuck at 26, 27. But
Right.
um, for a while, slowly, Peter aged, and then it kind of stopped. Miles has been in high school, from our point of view, his entire life.
Hmm.
Um, and uh, and that locked in age thing makes it harder for him to evolve, frankly.
Hmm.
And Peter's locked in age thing makes it harder for him to continue to evolve. He's evolved a lot, but now he's sort of at this point. So you can keep doing things to him, things can keep happening to him, he can keep doing things, but it's hard to evolve the character when you lock in ages, I find. Um, and that doesn't mean you have to make people age super quickly. I'm not a big proponent of, hey, he was a baby 1 minute and now he's 16. I'm just saying that time needs to pass.
Hmm.
But Miles is also a quipster when it comes to his battles, and so there's an element of that same everyman slash trickster archetype in Miles as well.
Got you. Yeah. So we're talking about, big supporting casts and, how it might be a little bit difficult to do that in, the coffee shop, right? But one thing the Gargoyles and Fantastic Four have in common is New York City, right? There's 8 million stories, plenty of opportunities for supporting casts, but I'm curious to know how we even get this crossover. So by the time this interview comes out, we're just under a week removed from Free Comic Book Day. So people have seen the teaser, though I haven't. But what are we in for with this crossover?
Well, I think one thing you have to keep in mind is that gargoyles are not part of the Marvel universe. So if you have to think about this in sort of there are two ways to look at it. One is simply, hey, they're crossing over. It's fun. Don't worry about it. Don't think about it too much. They're just doing it. The other way to look at it is that, okay, if the Gargoyles universe is, I don't want to stand straight over here, and the Marvel universe is over here, these stories are actually taking place in a universe where they overlap.
Mm,
Uh, there's no dimension hopping. It's what we're not doing in this story is saying, oh, they went through this portal and they wound up in the Marvel universe or vice versa. They just are both in New York. The Fantastic Four are in the Baxter building and the Gargoyles are in the Erie building. The Erie building's on Central Park South and the Baxter building's in Midtown. Um, and uh, and a flare goes up and the gargoyles head over to the Baxter building to check it out. And um, And it's that straightforward in the story. But if you want to feel like, how does this fit into continuity? You have to imagine that this isn't taking place in either Marvel 616 continuity or in Gargoyles universe continuity. It's taking place in some universe where they both exist.
Hmm.
So you can see how it fits in Demona Zero without going into too much detail because I don't want to spoil Demona Zero, but you can see very easily how in this middle universe, they went from the events of Demona Zero right into their Fantastic Four meeting. And
Hmm.
that meeting leads right into uh, the Marvel Fantastic Four meets the Gargoyles crossover, which in turn leads right into Dynamite's Gargoyles meets the Fantastic Four crossover. And all three of those stories take place, in essence, in that middle universe. But everything that happens in those three stories also fits the continuity of both,
Hmm.
except for the meeting itself. In other words, the backstory elements that are revealed about Demona also happen in this middle universe. And so these events, I think, aren't hard to buy into in terms of either continuity, except for the one thing that I completely skip over, and I mean completely, is that Gargoyles obviously is set in 1997, but I'm not dealing with the 1997 version of the Fantastic Four. I'm dealing with the current version of Fantastic Four.
Hmm.
And I am completely ignoring the temporal gap there. And just again, in that middle universe, you know, whatever year it's set in is the year when the 2025 Fantastic Four meet the 97 Gargoyles. And that's the one thing I'm totally skipping over. But again, you don't have to think in those complicated multiversal terms. You can just think in terms of, hey, here's a fun story, or three fun stories, hopefully. And I think we make the most of what the Gargoyles universe and the Marvel universe have in common. We've got some great guest stars in these two books, in addition to the Fantastic Four um, and the Clan. The biggest challenge for the books was that, my clan has 14 gargoyles in it, and the Fantastic Four has obviously four heroes plus a bunch of other family members, including Alicia, Masters Grimm, Alicia and Ben's two kids, Reed and Sue's two kids. There's a lot of potential characters that we could have thrown in there. You don't want to burden your poor artist with having to draw 18 characters in every panel, right? So one of the challenges for a guy like me in particular is to sort of say, okay, in this story, I'm going to focus on these members of the clan with these members from the Fantastic Four family. In this second story, it was great to have two because it allowed me to do a little different mixing and matching,
Hmm.
focus on a slightly different subset of the Gargoyles clan with a slightly different subset of the Fantastic Four and their family. And again, that was just fun for me.
Nice. And so, if I'm reading correctly, we're gonna get this Gargoyles Fantastic Four, at least the first of the one shots, in October of this year.
I think, yeah, one comes out in, they both come out in the fall.
Okay.
The, the Dynamite one was the one that was sort of advertised today. So I think that comes out in October. And the Marvel one actually comes out before that. I don't know if it's just earlier in October or
Mhm.
if it's in September. I'm not sure. Um, but yeah, they both come out in the fall.
Got you. Nice. So we've got this Demona miniseries, and that starts relatively soon. I'll say,
Yeah, Demona Zero's free comic day, May 3rd. And Demona number one is May 28th. And since you mentioned it earlier, Spider-Man, Spectacular Spider-Men, plural, number 15 comes out May 14th. So May is a big month for me. I got three books all coming out.
nice. And I gotta ask while we're here, plans for Gargoyles, kind of returning to the Manhattan Clan. in their present day. How far off are we from seeing them again?
Um, I don't have like release dates,
Mhm.
but we have a plan in the works for the next 12 issue arc of Gargoyles. So Gargoyles number one, volume two, uh, through 12, 1 through 12. Those plans are in the works. We have another mini series that has not been mentioned yet, so I can't talk about it yet. That's a four issue mini series that's going to come out probably first, probably before Gargoyles number one. Um, and but the point is we're still going, and we're uh, having a good time. I think they could always sell better, but we're still doing very well for Dynamite and Disney, and everyone's pretty happy. And I think the fact that we're doing this Fantastic Four crossover is an indication of that.
Yeah,
If Gargoyles wasn't doing well, why would anyone bother? Uh,
right.
uh, it might be interesting for Dynamite to be able to get the Fantastic Four in their books, but why would Marvel want it? And I think the answer is that we're doing pretty well for Dynamite, and so it's an exciting time for Gargoyles and Gargoyles fans, and I think the Fantastic Four crossover demonstrates that. But I don't want to kid anyone. This is all dependent on ongoing sales, not just the sales of the books that already came out, but so we want people to pre-order Demona number one, pre-order Demona number two and three by this point, maybe even four. I'm not sure if it's been solicited yet. But the point is that in this day and age, it's all about pre-orders. It's not even about, day of sales anymore. It's really about what defines the success of a comic book in this day and age is pre-orders. So if you have a comic book store, um, ask them to put Demona number one on your pull list. Um, if you buy electronically, pre-order it now. Don't
Mm,
just wait to get it once it comes out, but pre-order it now. It's that kind of sales figure that makes Dynamite and Disney go, hey, we need more.
mm,
Um, and that's what's going to keep us alive.
for sure. So for full transparency, the Gargoyles Demona number one final order cutoff on that was this past Monday as I'm recording this, so 2 weeks ago as you're listening. But you can still, since it doesn't come out till May 28th, still call up your shop, right? They can still place orders with the distributor of their choice. And what that does is it kind of puts them higher on the sales chart for these reorders. So if the series ends up having to go to a second print, like that's what would help trigger that. And all of those numbers count to tell the publishers and the licensors, you know, this is what the fans want. We need more of this. The demand is there. So it's definitely going to help to call in and pre-order that book. I know my shop uses Comic Hub. Um, there's other different point of sale services where you can kind of manage that pull list portion online. But look into it because it's not just a way to help the creators and the publisher of the series out, but it's also a great way to guarantee that you get your books on time. You're not that guy waiting around on a Thursday like, man, now I can't get it until next month or ever.
Right.
So, with that said, I'm really excited. I hope you guys went out for Free Comic Book Day and you got this preview of the Gargoyles and Fantastic Four and Demona issue zero, because that's exciting. And I hope you're excited about the things to come. So go ahead and pre-order that. Greg, if they want to follow your updates on social media, where can they do that?
I'm on Twitter at Greg_Weisman. Weisman's Weisman. And I also have a website, AskGregWeisman.com. I've been taking a little bit of a break from that. Got a little burnt out, but I'll be back eventually. And in any event, I've been answering questions on that website for over 20 years, and there's a searchable archive there. So 90% of the questions you'd have to ask, I've probably already answered, and you can just search the archive for those answers. So askgregweisman.com.
Awesome. I know where I'll be doing interview prep next time. So, with that said, guys, thank you so much for listening, Greg. Thank you for your time.
Thank
And
you.
For you guys out there, stay safe, stay awesome, and read something dope today. Peace.
Comics are dope.